I'm Thinking of Ending Things is a movie that is written and directed by Charlie Kaufman, one of the more complex metaphorical directors in Hollywood, and a book adaptation that would be much more easily accessible if you knew the information from the book. So what if, as me, you've never seen a Charlie Kaufman film or read the book? That makes this movie very hard to grasp. So I've taken the time to search the web, answer all the questions I had, and answer them very quickly and concisely here. I'll try to timestamp them if you're looking for a specific one. Here we go. What did I just watch? So what is this movie even about? In short, it manipulates the viewer as to what they think the perspective is. You are meant to think that the movie is told from the point of view of the woman whose name keeps changing, when in fact it's told from the point of view of the janitor, who is Jake when he grows up. All the scenes that take place at the house, in the car, anywhere where the janitor is not, is a fantasy. It's a fantasy of the grown-up, depressed Jake reliving his life if he had actually asked out the woman he met in the bar that night, like the story the woman tells at the dinner table.
So, I went with a friend to a bar near campus, and turned out to be trivia night.
Oh, I love this so far. Jake is crazy about trivia.
Everything the woman says is a fantasy created by the janitor and Jake, as she does not exist. Who is the janitor? As mentioned before, the janitor is Jake in reality, as he truly grows up to be. He is unhappy with the way his life turned out and contemplates suicide while thinking about how his life could have turned out. Why is she thinking of ending things?
I think of ending things.
She's not. She doesn't exist. All of her thoughts are Jake's thoughts. Jake is thinking of ending things, and not in the relationship way, but in the suicidal way. Why does her name and profession keep changing?
Jake tells us you're a painter. You're studying quantum psychics at the university.
Because he's making her up as she goes along. He's testing out what he thinks she would be like if he really met her. Why are the car rides so awkward? Because just like her name and profession, he's making up her personality as he goes along. He comes up with topics of conversation, asking her if she knows what books he's read and whatnot. On top of that, the monologues she has are Jake as the janitor frequently sifting in and out of fantasy as his reality creeps back in.
It is beautiful out here. In a bleak, heartbroken kind of way. What was the last road trip I took?
What were the phone calls and that voicemail?
There's only one question to resolve. I'm scared. I feel a little crazy here, not lucid. The assumptions are right. I can feel my fear growing. Now is the time for the answer. Just one question to answer.
They were Jake's suicidal thoughts creeping into the fantasy he was creating. That's why he, as the woman, almost never picks up the phone. And when she does pick up the phone, it is a troubled, ominous man's voice. She then puts the phone away immediately because the janitor is trying to ignore these thoughts, hence all the missed calls. What is that swing set? It's the swing set the janitor sees every day on the way to school, another example of the janitor's reality mixing in with his fantasy. Why does Jake have a picture of her? He said that was a picture of him when he was younger. I have two theories for this one. It's either part of the fantasy where he's trying to create more backstory for her, or that really is him when he was young and his fantasy woman is an idealized version of him. What do you mean, idealized version of him? I mean, he absolutely hates the direction his life has taken. She looks like him because she is him. He sees her as another way he could have grown up. She could have been an artist or a physicist, just like he could have. As we see, their changing professions frequently cross over with each other. But he was brought down by his judgmental parents and the ideas of the times.
Jake used to paint too, of course.
Parents? Ideals of the times? We'll get to the parents. But as for the ideals of the times, in his fantasies, he frequently uses his characters to call out old ideals that are no longer acceptable, such as the word sissy.
One might just take issue with her use of the word sissy.
Yeah, of course.
Homosexuality being mentioned in a disorder in the 20th century, and the appropriateness of Baby It's Cold Outside. This question of appropriateness is confirmed by his dad at the dinner table, who called Billy Crystal a Nancy.
Billy Crystal is a Nancy.
This carries over to his initial interests of painting and musicals, how much he knows about them, and how he was gradually pushed away from these interests by his parents. So why do the parents act weird? Again, everything is Jake's manifestation. Why the mom has a creepy laugh and the dad has a band-aid, I don't know. I honestly don't know. As for the things they say, that's how they used to speak with Jake, or how he imagines they spoke with him, and that's how it sat in his memory after all these years. For example, in the midst of the woman's ever-changing professions, he presents her as an artist. While everything starts out simple and positive, they start criticizing her work.
I mean, they're pretty, but I don't see how it's supposed to make me feel something if there's not a person in them feeling something, if there's not a person in them feeling sad or joyous or whatever other emotion you said.
Well, maybe think of yourself as the person looking out at the scene.
Well, I'd have to see me in them.
Well, if you were there, you wouldn't see yourself, right?
Well, I would if I looked down. I'm not a ghost.
I can attest to that, especially in the bedroom.
This is evidenced by the fact that he had paintings of the same caliber in his basement, showing he probably had that same conversation with his parents at some point. Why do the parents' age change? After she has received the phone calls, which are really his suicidal thoughts, his fantasy begins to fall apart. This results in him looking back at his life with his family, his father's Lewy body dementia, his mother's sickness and death, and his childhood. What's in the basement? Everything he's hiding, his metaphorical basement. And the washing machine is his janitor's uniform because he's ashamed that he's a janitor, and in the adjacent room is all his art, an interest he eventually stopped pursuing because his parents weren't supportive of him. Why the very specific book titles? Throughout the film, Leo Tolstoy, William Wordsworth, and David Foster Wallace are mentioned, among others. Books by them can actually be found in Jake's bedroom, showing that he read their works growing up. But on top of being fans of their work, they also relate to the themes of the movie. He talks about Tolstoy's idea of happy families, one he does not think he had. William Wordsworth wrote many poems on a woman named Lucy, his initial name for the woman. And one of David Foster Wallace's books of essays is mentioned. I don't know enough about him to say why this book of essays is important, but I do know David Foster Wallace committed suicide, so that probably is a big hint towards his presence in the movie. Why is her poem in the book she finds?
Coming home is terrible, whether the dogs lick your face or not. Whether you have a wife or just a wife-shaped loneliness waiting for you.
She doesn't exist, and her poem isn't an original. It's part of a book Jake read by Eva H.D. when he was younger, which again is why it pops up. Why is the dog always wet? I don't know. This one really bothers me a lot more than it should. If you have an answer, please let me know. What's with the short movie that was in the middle of the movie? The janitor is watching a cheesy romance movie. That's kind of it. It's just stylized to seem more important because he is watching it instead of fantasizing. Why does the woman get replaced with a different actress at one point?
Debord says, the spectacle cannot be understood as a mere visual deception produced by mass media technologies.
He's imagining her as the actress from the cheesy romance he watched. Why is the ice cream shop in the middle of nowhere? I don't know. Stylization? Why are two of the girls mean to him? Because the students are mean to him at school. Even in his fantasy, he pictures the students at school being mean to him. So who was that other girl? And what was that Rash? She was an unpopular girl, just like him. He has a monologue in the film about the popular students and then the unpopular students, who are black auras and oozing wounds.
I see, I can tell that they still carry that stuff around with them. Like a black aura, like a millstone, like an oozing wound.
The rash they both see on each other in his fantasy symbolize the oozing wounds of unpopularity they represent. Why do she and the janitor react that way at the end? Here, Jake as the janitor is finally meeting or coming to terms with his fantasy. She doesn't exist, and his life has been lived. perhaps not as fully as he wanted it to be. She says all those mean things to him, which are really him thinking of the worst case scenario of how the woman feels that night went, since she didn't ask him out. With that, he's finally able to let go of the fantasy. What was with Oklahoma, and how does it all relate to Jake? Oklahoma is a very important and well-known musical, with a plot mostly revolving around the courtship of a woman named Lori by the hero Curly and the villain Judd. Jake mentions how Oklahoma is a very important production to the high school and to the town. It relates to Jake's love of theater as it frequently pops up both in and out of the fantasy. But why Oklahoma specifically? As mentioned, the plot revolves around the courtship of a woman by both a hero and a villain. Throughout the film, Jake uses Oklahoma to try to picture himself as the hero Curly.
And I had to practically yell it. It was so noisy. And Jake raised his glass and went, "Oh yeah, well, we're helpfully fortified." And I laughed, which broke the ice. And I think he was egged on by my laughing, because he went on to tell me that he was a verbalist.
But eventually finds himself in the place of the villain, Judd, who doesn't get the woman. I will explain more in detail shortly. What was the dance sequence? Oklahoma has a famous dream ballet, which is an all-dance, no-singing number that represents the themes of what's currently happening. This is basically what happened, a dream ballet summarizing the janitor's feelings. He's always viewed himself as the heroic Curly who gets the girl, but really he's the villainous Judd, the janitor, who's destined to be alone. Was he winning an award at the end? Was that real? That was, I can only assume, his final fantasy as he succumbs to committing suicide. The speech is from A Beautiful Mind, a movie that could also be found in his bedroom along with the books from earlier. I'm sure there's also some parallel about the hope to overcome an out-of-touch reality to become successful, as John Nash did in A Beautiful Mind, but that makes it even darker. What was he singing? Oklahoma, as with the theme. This song was Lonely Room, Judd's song in Oklahoma. His fantasy that he, and not Curly, would get the girl. Spoiler alert for Oklahoma, Judd ends up falling on his knife in a brawl and dying. What's with the pigs and the maggots in the farm, and the pig at the end? At the farm, Jake tells a story about pigs being eaten by maggots from the inside out. This represents how he feels as a person, being eaten from the inside out by his depression. As for the pig at the end, my best guess is it's bringing back the theme of the pig that died from maggots just like the janitor died from depression. Hopefully this answers a few questions about the movie. I know it was really confusing for me, but it was still pretty interesting.